you can't remember where. Uh, I think we were talking about going to Hebrews chapter 2, and I think the section goes all the way down to verse 9.
Can you just remind me what we were looking for in that?
Well, we were thinking about Revelation, and it's because that's where he starts. He starts with affirming that God is not just a philosophical proposition out there, but a dynamic, powerful, living, present reality. He doesn't argue for the presence of God. He just says, okay, God's been revealing himself dynamically, positively from Old Testament times. Well, he revealed himself to our fathers. That's to the nation of Israel from the very beginning, when he revealed himself to Abraham and said, you go out to the land I show you and I'll give it to you, and I'll make you a mighty nation, and I'll bless you, and I'll bless everybody who blesses you. And from that point on, God, this is the writer to the Hebrews, is saying, yeah, God in former times spoke to our forefathers through the prophets, and has in this final age spoken to us through the Son. So the topic is God's revelation, and his revelation is something that has obviously progressed from the beginning. Well, I think God's revelation has been powerful and present in the world ever since it was created. Like Paul said in his letter to the Romans, ever since the ever since the beginning of the world, his invisible attributes have been plain in the things that he's made. So there's always been a revelation, the fingerprints of God all over the creation. If you're sensitive, and well, it's not even so much sensitive, but if you want to see it, you can see it plainly. But some things happen to the human race that makes it so that we don't want to see it, or we know it's there, the creator God, but we don't want to meet him as he is. We make up our own models, and that can degenerate into, just pure selfishness. Excuse me. Yeah. So, yeah, that revelation has always been there, but specifically it came through into the nation of Israel. And so that section of that of his letter, that first section of Hebrews, is about that revelation, and it ends up talking about us on the receiving end in chapter 2. The first chapter that we talked about at length is saying how there's how can I get that? There's the revelation that comes through the Son. That's the bit that he's trying to emphasize, and then he gives 7. I think I counted up 7. Yeah, 7 kind of ways in which the Son of God is so much superior than the prophets of the of the previous kind of build up that God had been working towards a climax, which has come, and we're now living in this time of like the Gospels, like Mark says, that this is a time of fulfillment, when what was written in the prophet Isaiah, it was kind of like building up to this final revelation when all the hills had to be flattened and all the valleys filled up, so that the coming of the Messiah, the Christ, the King of creation as well as the King of history, was present and in the world. And then the story of Jesus. But this writer to the Hebrews is kind of treating it pretty delicately, because he doesn't mention the name Jesus until in verse what is it, verse 9. I think that's the section that kind of we need to look at this morning, from chapter 2 to chapter 2 verse 1 down to verse 9.
Right.
Maybe just as a preliminary, it's talked about Jesus being, can you remember what we've already been talking about? That the Son is the, oh, that's right, God's appointed him heir of the universe. And it's through him that he made all orders of existence. So he's kind of, the Son is seen as the one to whom the whole universe belongs, and then also as the one who, in the beginning, working with the Father, created the universe. So everything belongs to him. He created everything. Then he's the outshining of God's glory.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned this, that in the Gospels, we only see his glory shining out once, when he was on the mountain of transfiguration. And that must have been stupendous, if you're sitting there kind of getting blown away with that kind of glory that appeared on the mountain of Sinai and scared the daylights out of Israel. And Moses sort of went up into it and got the 10 Commandments and stuff. But the rest of it, the glory of Jesus, like you said, when at the Last Supper, he said, you mentioned it, after Judas went out, now is the Son of Man glorified glorified, and in him the Father is glorified. And if the Father is glorified in him, he will glorify then God will glorify him in himself, glorify Jesus in himself. But what we see from then on is him getting captured, praying in agony in the Garden of Gethsemane, and then being captured, dragged off and put through, I think I counted 5 trials, trying to put him to death legally. But in the end, the only charge that they could lay against him was that he claimed to be the Son of God. And I mean, you don't think it's very much of glory to see somebody crucified and left on a cross to die. And it was all turned around, I think, 3 days after they killed him, when he rose from the dead. And I think his glory then was still not the effulgence of God's glory. It was still reserved in some way, because it was as the incarnate God, Son of God, that he rose from the dead. And he certainly was much more than an ordinary man on that resurrection day, and in his appearances over the next 40 days to the apostles. But the glory that you see there is, what can you call it? Moral glory.
I wonder if that captures a little bit. Last night we were talking a bit about that idea of meekness. And meekness has in it that sense of humility, gentleness in action, but it's also an attitude that has a deep trust of God. But it's also power that's been brought under control. And I think you see that in Jesus. It's the power of God is all there and available. but it's been veiled, or he's limited that glory and power for the sake of not overwhelming human beings and allowing human beings to have the ability to choose to respond, follow, and love. And for those who don't want to open their eyes to that reality, they can make all the excuses in the world for not believing in Jesus. And I think the
Yeah.
fact that Jesus only appeared to those who were believers,
Yeah.
Still appeared as a man who'd been most definitely raised from the dead, physical body with the scars of his crucifixion.
Yeah.
Yeah, something there about it's a the humility of God, I think, to
Yeah.
relate to us in that kind of way, with a
Yeah.
kindness that allows us to respond.
Remember Philippians chapter 2, where it says about, though he was in the form of God, yet he made himself nothing. And then he was revealing himself in the form of a human being. Yeah. And still humbled himself by accepting death and being crucified. So, yeah, there's a way of being in the world that God chose that makes him accessible, but only accessible to faith. I'm reminded in John chapter 14, that's the chapter where the disciples are asking all kinds of questions. Where are you going? How do we know the way? Show us the Father. And then the final question was put at the end of the chapter by, or maybe not the end of the chapter, but by Judas, not Iscariot, the other Judas, where it says, he said, Lord, what can have happened that you intend to reveal yourself to us and not to the rest of the world? That's precisely what you were just saying. And Jesus' answer was there. He said, if anyone keeps, if anyone loves me, he will keep my commands, and the Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our dwelling with him. But he who does not love me does not keep my commands. And I think there's that, I mean, just again, reading this morning, the Psalm chapter 8 is quoted here at the end of this passage in Hebrews chapter 2, in verse 6. But just reading that through and thinking of just God's grace and what he did for us human beings. It's we have such a privileged position. We've got a dignity in all of God's creation, as this writer to the Hebrews makes clear, much greater than an angel. A human being is made in the image of God and given rule over all of God's creation, his handiwork, and so on. So, yeah. Well, it talks about Jesus' glory, and then it talks about him being the express stamp of God's image. You can't say any more clearly that the Son is God in that first section. And
then the sustainer of the universe.
Wow. And I got interested in what it meant to sustain. And the Greek word is a dynamic word. It doesn't, I don't know, do people nowadays know about the myth of Atlas, the creatures, according to Greek mythology, that the Titans, the Titan that was given the job of holding the world up
Oh, yeah.
That picture of Atlas with the world on his shoulders,
Yep.
holding it up. But the word that's used in Greek to talk about Jesus sustaining the universe, it means not only sustaining it, but keeping it together, holding it, uh, not just holding it up and stopping it from sinking into the mud like Atlas, but it's holding it so that it coheres and that it moves forward to its proper destiny, what it's meant to be. And it's a beautiful thought that the power of Jesus Christ is, the thing that holds the molecules together and holds the atoms together.
Mm.
And what is unleashed when we now explode an atomic bomb, that power is there within the atoms of the universe.
Mm.
And to see it as the power of Jesus Christ sustaining the universe, keeping it in, to make it cohere. And not only that, but behind it is the purpose of God being worked out,
Mm.
age by age by age. And this writer is kind of seeing the link between the revelation of God that in former times was given through the prophets, but now given through the Son, that it's a dynamic thing, God's revelation. And it comes back again to Jesus sustaining the universe by his word of power. Yeah, beautiful thoughts. Well, anyway, and then it talks in that first section about Jesus being raised from the dead and seated at the majesty on high, meaning that he's done the work that he needed to do 2,000 years ago, and everything is on course to the purpose that God has for the universe. And not only that, but this is what he's going on to point out in chapter 2, that we human beings are also on course to the purpose that God has for us, which he points out using Psalm 8 as just so as high as you can get, so much higher than the angels. And uh, the writer quotes, I don't know how many times, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, uh, 5 Psalms from the Old Testament. Just I have a problem with that, actually, because he's quoting from the Greek translation that was made 200 years before Christ. And then he's not actually interested in what the psalm meant when it was written, but
Right.
what he's using the psalm for is to just say, this son that we are that we've got the privilege of listening to, the son who's revealing God's ongoing purpose, that yeah, just wanting to say he's God and he's powerful, and you better not neglect him. You really need to pay attention. And
That was
so
a
he gets,
fairly common practice amongst the New Testament writers, though, wasn't it? Apart from Jesus, who always quoted the Psalms and the scriptures and captured their meaning, but it happens in Paul as well, where he'll just use a part of a little part of a prophecy or a psalm or something to fulfill the purpose that he wants for it, not to capture the meaning of it originally.
yeah, that's Paul not so bad. I think it's only 2 places where he stretches the point, but
Yeah.
he also, like Jesus, usually quoted the meaning from the context of the Psalms or the quotations in the Old Testament 2 or 3 times. Anyway, I don't know how well. I think I do resolve it. It's how you see revelation and inspiration. Obviously, even in the Old Testament, God used the prophets in their times and with their outlook, their way of seeing the world and seeing God too. And that, yeah, it's not so much the actual words that are spoken. And I know this is heresy in a lot of places, but it's not so much the words, but it's the meaning. And meaning is slippery. You can't nail it down with just one word. And words change their meanings anyway. So to make some kind of theory of inspiration or make you've got to believe that every single word is inspired in such a way that there's one absolute meaning. We start to get away from what really happened. And what really happened was the dynamic God of the creation is still working, and he's working in passing ideas on to the human race. The truth expressed in whatever way you can express it. That's why translations are valid, because truth can be put into words, but we have to be very, very careful to think beyond the words back into the truth that is being revealed, and that's a meaning that's there. And meaning comes not through just philosophy, because you can get all kinds of marvelous ideas, or not just through art and poetry and literature, because I mean, that can all be used. Reasoning and philosophy are important, and they're involved in the revelation, and so is art and beauty and poetry. It's also important, and it's also used in the revelation. But we human beings have to go beyond that. And I think that's why in John he used the word logos. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That there's something dynamic about it. It's not just a word written in a book and stuffed away on a shelf, but it's a living word. It's a dynamic word.
Yeah.
And that's Jesus. Anyway, I'm carried away.
Well, I think that's also, say, what I've been reading in Rodney Stark, Victory of Reason. His argument is that for the Christians, they argued about the meaning a lot. And as arguing about the meaning of the scriptures, they started to develop ways of thinking about truth and how you come to truth and you work out stuff together. And he says he reckons that's the foundation of sort of the thinking and science, and the fact that, so I think he compares that, say, with Islam, where Muhammad wrote a whole lot of words himself, and that's why you have to read it in the original Arabic, and you can't really argue about his meaning. You've just got to say, well, this is what Muhammad said, we've just got to do it. Whereas Jesus never wrote anything down except for what he wrote in the sand that time with the woman caught in adultery.
Yeah.
But it's the words of Jesus expressed by people who were sort of interpreting and understanding what he said. And so there's lots of scope for thinking through what's the meaning behind this.
Yeah.
And it's actually a helpful, I guess in ways, it's a helpful intellectual exercise to have to come up with an argument and build a case in a particular scripture, but also across the whole scope of the scriptures for what you want to say, and then to convince others of that. And that actually helps you in all of your life.
Yeah. Isn't that exciting? Oh, yes. That's probably where I got it from. I read that book twice, I think. And you've said it much clearer than what I said it. That's how God's revealed himself. It's not not something that you can nail down and say that's it. It's something that's living and needs to be. Later on in his book here, this writer says, chapter 11, without faith it's impossible to please God, for he that comes to God must believe that he is, and that he's a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. That's what you were saying earlier, that the revelation of God is there, the glory somehow or other brought down to our size so that we can interact with it if we choose to. But if we don't choose to, if we decide, if we let our rebellion rule in our lives, then we won't see it. Yeah. Oh dear. Anyway, should we read chapter 2?
Well, we could, but we've probably actually nearly run out of time.
Oh, bother. Well, there you go.
So we may just
you
have to leave it. I'm away for 3 weeks in the US.
Okay.
In Kaya. So we're going to come back strong and ready to go straight away into Hebrews chapter 2, verses 1 to 9.
I'll tell you what, we'll go into chapter 2, 1 to 9, and you summarize the first chapter.
All right. I'll have to do some homework while I'm away.
Just read it.
Yeah, I'll read it. Okay. I'll read
All
it a
right.
few times and soak it up.
When do you leave?
Sunday. We've got a community retreat over the weekend, and then
Of course.
head down to Melbourne on Sunday afternoon.
Yeah. I'll see if I can get my nurse Elvita to take me.
Great.
It's only a Port.
In
Not,
Port?
yeah,
Yeah,
in
Port's
Port.
about an hour away.
Yeah.
So we've
We
hired
could,
a memorial hall function room and kitchen. So hopefully that's where we'll eat and do all that sort of stuff.
all right.
You could just come up for the morning on Saturday or Sunday.
No, I want to be there. Anyway, I'll see how we go. Had a bad day yesterday,
Good job.
but recovered a little bit.
What happened?
Well, I think I went too hard at doing exercises, nearly killed myself. But terrible to recognize, well, to accept that you're losing it bit by bit by bit.
Did you pass out or something, or?
Almost, and then didn't recover.
Right.
But
you look good today.
Taken.
You're going well today.
Well, yeah. Went to bed early, slept well, got up early and had a cold shower. That probably isn't a wise thing, but yeah, life is good. Life is so good.
Is there a I was just thinking about this the other day. I know Elvita wanted to get another reverse cycle air conditioning for heating and stuff in one of those rooms. Is that this room or your bedroom that you want to get that?
I've talked about it before. It's this room and the next room, and there's a place outside, and Gus has already wired it to put in an air conditioner there with the compressor there and the electricity up to put 2 units, one in this room and one in that room. And it came to $7,000, but that was a couple of years ago now.
Okay. All right. No worries. We'll have a look at that then.
Okay. Well, all right. Okay. Bless you. I'll see you at the weekend. God willing.
Thanks, Laurie. Bye.
Bless you. Go well.